So good hearing life-changing story. We love those stories around here. And if you're at Summit long enough, you'll find that we don't want anybody to skip across the surface of a surface-deep spiritual life, but we want everyone to have a life-changing experience and journey with Jesus. And so, hey, happy Easter, Summit. How you doing? Good. Y'all look so good in your Easter stuff. I tucked my shirt in today. I'm wearing my wedding shoes. I'm ready. That time of the year. But hey, if we haven't met before, my name is Alex. I'm one of the pastors here. And a little bit about me is I grew up in the 90s. Anyone else grow up in the 90s? Yeah? All right, cool. A few of us. Some of you are ashamed of that, but that's okay. I was born in the 80s, grew up in the 90s, and the reason I share that is because we had a lot of unique cultural experiences, but the one that stuck for me the most is that growing up, I wanted to be like Mike. And so if you grew up in the 90s, you know what I'm talking about. I am a part of the Michael Jordan generation. I wanted to be like Mike. And so if you don't remember the hype machine that was Michael Jordan, it was a well-oiled marketing machine. And it worked on this guy because I wanted nothing more than to be a professional athlete when I grew up. Now, I don't know if you can see me right now, but I have the body of someone who's good at math, okay? Which I am. But with this gene pool, the odds were stacked against that dream, but it didn't really hit me until I was sitting on the bench of my B team, 8th grade suburban middle school basketball team when it finally sunk in, I'll never be a professional athlete. Have you ever experienced the death of a dream? Maybe it was basketball or maybe it was bigger. I don't mean just figuring out an idea won't work. I mean a dream that was the source of your life's purpose, that gave you hope when nothing else was going your way. That dream that you oriented your life around only for that moment where the dream is over to hit you like a ton of bricks. Have you ever had that moment? That's where the disciples were after the death of Jesus. They didn't just lose a friend. These guys had staked their lives, their careers, their sense of purpose around what Jesus said. Because Jesus, the promised Messiah, was gonna fulfill God's promises from the Old Testament. He was gonna bring the kingdom of heaven with him, and the disciples were gonna be at the forefront of establishing this kingdom, but then Jesus died. And I don't know, can you imagine the whirlwind that 24 hours was from Maundy, Thursday to Good Friday? They were eating supper together one night, and he was saying some strange things about leaving them, about being betrayed, when suddenly, as they were praying in a garden, Jesus is arrested. He's on trial for blasphemy. They're torturing him, and the Roman government agrees to kill him on the worst killing device known to man, a Roman cross. And it was so sudden and so terrifying that all of his disciples, except one, scattered. It was a fend for yourself kind of moment, a hide from the authorities and hopefully even your neighbors won't turn you in kind of deal. And by Friday night, the dream was dead. And Saturday goes by and they're just shocked as they sit there. Did that just happen? Was it all fake? But his teachings were so powerful. We saw him do miracles. What's even next for us? But then Sunday came, y'all. And the disciples were sitting there when some of the women from their crew burst in. And their words were spilling out of them in a rush. And they were saying, 2 men were standing at Jesus' empty tomb saying, why are you looking for the living among the dead? He's risen. And while the men continued to question the women, Peter burst out of the house and started running towards the tomb. And he got there and it was open and all he saw were the strips of linen that Jesus was wrapped in, but no Jesus. And these guys were confused. What's going on? What had happened? And that's where we're gonna pick up today with the testimony that's called the Road to Emmaus, starting in Luke 24, verse 13. And it says, now that same day, 2 of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. And they were talking with each other about everything that had happened. And as they talked and discussed these things with each other, Jesus himself came and walked along with them. But they were kept from recognizing him. Why didn't they recognize Jesus? Why did that happen? That seems weird. Was he pulling a Superman Clark Kent thing and just had his glasses on and they couldn't recognize him? Or did he shave his beard? Or did his resurrected body look different or something? We don't know, to be honest. We don't know why. But what I know is sometimes God doesn't always let us in on what's going on. And there's moments where we want to know. We will say, God, I feel entitled to understand what is happening right now. But God has other interests in mind. And often he'll let us struggle through because of the reasons that we can't see quite yet. And then Jesus goes on and asks them, what are you discussing together as you walk along? And the disciples stood still, their faces downcast. You know, they still can't wrap their head around what's happened. These guys they're disheartened. They are hurting. And I know in life there are some disappointments that you just got to get over. I get it. I'm a Cowboys fan, okay? It just is what it is. But there are other disappointments that suck the life out of you, that suck the hope. And that's where Jesus caught them, in the middle of crippling disappointment. And that's when one of them, named Cleopas, asked him, are you the only one visiting Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened there in these days? What things? Jesus asked. All right, now Jesus is just messing with them at this point, okay? He's jacking with his kids. I don't know, have you ever done that with your kids? I definitely have. Where they don't know that you know what they don't think that you know, yeah? That's what's happening. Jesus, why don't you tell me what you think's going on? And they say, about Jesus of Nazareth. He was a prophet, powerful in word and deed before God and all the people. The chief priests and our rulers handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel. And what is more, it is the third day since all this took place. In addition, some of our women amazed us. They went to the tomb early this morning, but didn't find his body. They came and told us that they had seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. And then some of our companions went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they did not see Jesus. Did y'all catch that? They just shared the gospel story. They have all the pieces, but they aren't putting it together. But here's the part I want to focus on. It's when they said, but we had hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel. The disciples thought they knew what redeem Israel meant. They imagined King Jesus rising as a modern David or an Alexander the Great ordained by God. He would throw off the Roman oppressors with an uprising. And with the Romans out of the way, the kingdom of Israel would be reestablished. Israel would return to following God's ways, and their whole people would come back to God. And not only would they have freedom to practice their faith fully again, but maybe this time they would succeed in being a people who perfectly followed the laws, and the whole world would come under the good and beautiful reign of God. And now we're 2,000 years later, and we know that Jesus was redeeming Israel, but he was doing so much more. It wasn't just a land and a place and only a certain people, but it was something available to the entire world. That the lost would be found, the hurting would be healed, relationships would be restored, that the whole earth was being invited into this promise. But their hope was in what they thought God would do. You catching that? And so it debilitated them when it didn't go according to their plan. And they walked along the road, telling their disappointments to Jesus himself. The resurrected Jesus was right in front of them, walking on the road to Emmaus as they spilled their guts about how God let them down. And can I tell you something? Jesus can handle your anger. He can handle your disappointments and your questions. Those moments where we want to say, Jesus, it wasn't supposed to be this way. Jesus, I trusted you. Why does my life look like this? Jesus, if it just went according to my plan, it all would have been great. Don't you know that? And this is the character of God. He can handle that. We see this in the Psalms, which are the prayers of the Jewish people. And they're filled with candid responses to God, sharing all of life's hurts and disappointments and just unleashing it. But this time, it's actually in front of Jesus. And Jesus can handle your raw emotions. He can handle your raw thoughts and candid opinions. He can handle you unloading whatever you need to. Because maybe you'll find, as you voice your disappointments, just like the disciples did on that road to Emmaus, Jesus was there the whole time. And on that road to Emmaus, as the disciples were unloading their dashed hopes, the true source of the abundant and eternal life, the living, breathing, resurrected hope that their souls truly needed was right beside them. It wasn't a plan, it wasn't an outcome, it was a person. Hope was literally alive. And what they experienced on the mountaintops with Jesus would be no less true in the valleys. It's just not as easy to see there. And they didn't recognize it yet. But as they kept walking, as they wrestled with what their future looked like, as they picked up the pieces of life's disappointments, Jesus was there too. And so what we're gonna do at this time is the worship team's gonna come back out, and I wanna invite you guys, you can just stay seated where you're at. And they're gonna sing a song over us. And for some of you, you might know the song, and so feel free to sing along. But for some of you, maybe what you need today is to turn this into a prayer. That you need to know that there is a God who's ready to meet with you. That whatever disappointments or dashed dreams that you're carrying with you, that Jesus is ready to meet with you. And so let's let the worship team sing this song over us.
Oh, how high would I climb mountains if the mountains were where you hide? Oh, how far I'd scale the valleys if you graced the other side. Oh, how long have I chased rivers from lowly seas to where they rise, against the rush of grace descending from the source of its supply. 'Cause in the highlands and the heartache, you're neither more or less inclined. I would search and stop at nothing. You're just not that hard to find. I will praise you on the mountain, and I will praise you in the mountains in my way. You're the sun where my feet are. So I will praise you in the valleys all the same. No less God within the shadows, no less faithful when the night leads me astray. You're the heaven where my heart is. In the highlands and the heartache all the same. Oh, oh, oh. shadows, no less faithful when the night leads me astray. You're the heaven where my heart beats, in the highlands and the heartache all the same.
And it is awesome to worship with you guys. My name is Brian, if I haven't met you before. And we got church folk here, and we got folks that are just visiting, and we're excited about that. But for our church folk, there's this thing that happens at Easter, that if we don't say it, some people go home thinking Easter service wasn't complete. It's really easy. It's I say he is risen, and then the crowd responds, he is risen indeed. So we're going to do that, and if you need help with your line, just yell, line, and the ushers will come and tell you what you're supposed to say. He is risen indeed, all right? So here we go. He is risen. He is risen indeed. You just made some church folks' heart happy, all right? So thank you. Pat yourself on the back, and yeah. Hey, if you're here visiting, I'm glad that you're here. If you're here because you went to the Egg Fest, you're an Egg Fester, welcome, and I'm glad that you're joining us. And that song that we just sang is powerful. I will praise you in the mountain, and I will praise you when the mountain is in my way. Perhaps right now you're in that place where there is a mountain in your way, and I don't know what that looks like. But my hope, my desire is that today we catch a new vision for what that looks like. Right, Alex pointed out the disappointment that the disciples were experiencing as they're walking back on the road to Emmaus. Their hope died on Friday when Jesus' lifeless body was removed from the cross and placed in a tomb. Saturday was pretty silent. And Sunday, they're slinking back home. They're in a tough spot, and as they're walking, it's this undercover boss kind of moment as they encounter this stranger, Jesus himself, and they're telling Jesus about Jesus, but they don't realize it. And it's a beautiful moment where they get to share their fear, their disillusionment that it entered their world at his death. That this was unfiltered disappointment. And then the stranger that they're walking and talking with kind of pulls back the curtain. We read this, Jesus said to them, how foolish you are, and how slow to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Did not the Messiah have to suffer these things and then enter his glory? And beginning with Moses and the prophets, he explained to them what was said in the scriptures concerning himself. In this moment, Jesus goes Old Testament on them. Now, at that time, there wasn't an Old Testament because there wasn't yet a New Testament written about the life of Christ in the early church. And so he starts with Moses and the prophets and all of the scripture and says, guys, you don't understand this. You're not getting it. The prophets pointed to the death and resurrection of the Messiah. The Messiah had to suffer these things to enter his glory. This is a classic, like for the disciples, we know a lot, but we haven't connected the dots. I mean, these guys were Jewish bros. They grew up under the Torah, under the law. They had memorized the first 5 books of the Bible, all 307,000 Hebrew words. Like they knew their stuff, yet they were failing to connect the dots and how all of that pointed to the death and resurrection of the Messiah of Jesus. And at this moment, their disappointment was the lens through which they were viewing their world. That's all that they could see. And I know for most of us here, we've been in those times where disappointment is the glasses that we're wearing, and it's how we view our world. It could be disappointment or disillusionment in the marriage, or our education, or parenting, or singleness, or addiction, or that sin that we can't be free of, and sin wrecks our lives and makes a mess of everything. And you just end up in a spot where you go, what just happened? How did I end up here? Will I recover? Will we recover? Is this as good as it's going to get? And many of us live in this sort of existence in our world, just getting by, not hoping for much because hope tends to disappoint, not pushing too hard because why bother? It is what it is, so And yet we're designed for more. We're designed for greater. And so we get back to these travelers on the road to Emmaus. As they approached the village to which they were going, Jesus continued on as if he were going further. But they urged him strongly, stay with us, for it is nearly evening. The day is almost over. And so he went in to stay with them. Now, in this moment, this is what I would describe as poor parenting, right? Like, we know not to talk to strangers. We know not to invite them in for dinner. We know not to invite them to stay for the evening. This is how horror movies begin. And yet in this moment, this is what they're doing. And in their culture, where hospitality was paramount, to leave someone out in the cold was unthinkable. And so they go, bro, we like what you have to say. We want to hear more from you. Come eat with us. Come have dinner with us. When Jesus was at the table with them, he took the bread. He gave thanks. He broke it, and he began to give it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he disappeared from their sight. This is an incredible encounter for these guys. Initially, they're kept from seeing Jesus. As Alex said, we don't really know why. But then he breaks bread with them, and then he plays hide and seek and disappears. Like, it's kind of weird, but that's what he does. And he breaks bread, and you go, what's significant about that? Well, if we go from this Sunday evening back to Thursday night, Jesus and the disciples were in the city of Jerusalem eating the Passover meal, celebrating the Passover meal. And we'll go back to that. It says this in Luke 22, and Jesus, he took bread, gave thanks, and broke it, and gave it to them. He said, this is my body given for you. Do this in remembrance of me. In the same way, after the supper, he took the cup, saying, this cup is the new covenant in my blood, which is poured out for you. They're celebrating the Passover meal. And if you don't know the Passover meal, this goes back generations for the Israelites when God rescued them out of Egyptian captivity. And they would celebrate this meal to remember that time. And it's in this moment that Jesus takes some elements of the Passover meal and brings new meaning to them. Greater significance to those things. The bread, he says, this represents my body that will be given for us on the cross. The wine, he says, this signifies my blood that will be shed for the new covenant. Now, the disciples are eating a meal. They don't understand what Jesus is saying and pointing to the next day when he would die on that cross, where his body would be given up for them, for you, for me, for all of creation, where Jesus would initiate a new covenant. And where in Hebrews it says that this new covenant is better than the old covenant. It's a better covenant. And the old covenant that Jesus is talking about in the Old Testament required the sacrifice and shedding of blood, the sacrifice of an animal and the shedding of their blood to cover over or atone for our sin. But the blood of animals was not sufficient for that, so Jesus was sacrificed. He died as the perfect sacrifice. And you go, but why did Jesus have to die? Because you and I are sinners. And not cute little sinners. Like, we got this broken soul because of our sin, our desire to walk away from God and do things on our own. Our desire to look at the things of God and say, I would rather do what my pleasure says, what my flesh says, what my mind says, than obey you. And we call that sin. And sometimes we like to dismiss it and go, I'm just a little sinner. We underestimate the impact that our sin has. And that then in turn kind of undersells the grace of God through the sacrifice of Christ. Like, I love how Paul says it in Romans 7 when he's looking at his own life and he says, what a wretched man I am. Now, he's not just beating himself up saying, oh, I'm horrible. He's looking at the sin in his life compared to the holiness of God and saying, I don't measure up. I really am a wretched man. And so this is why Jesus had to die. We owe a debt we could not pay, so he initiated a new covenant through the sacrifice. And so in this moment with these two men in Emmaus, he breaks bread and their eyes are opened. And they realize, oh my goodness, we are in the presence of the resurrected Christ. And their response, they asked each other, were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road and opened the scriptures to us? They got up and returned at once to Jerusalem. There they found the 11 and those with them assembled together and saying, it is true, the Lord is risen and has appeared to Simon. Then the two told what had happened on the way and how Jesus was recognized by them when they broke bread. See, as they were walking and talking with the stranger, they ended up in a conversation they didn't know would change everything for them. That God was already at work in their hearts. Where their hope had died on Friday, they walked and talked with a resurrected Jesus, and something was happening with them on Sunday. Their hope was being resurrected. A small ember of hope was being fanned into flame, and the result, they went back to where they came from with new determination and hope. It is true, the Lord has risen. Where hope had flatlined in their life, it began to beat again with new fervor. Well, the question for us today then is, how does this impact us? 2,000 years removed from this, how does it impact us today? Well, in our lives, many of us, like the disciples, are wandering through life. And we look over here for some hope, and we think this thing will promise us hope, and it doesn't. So we wander over here trying to find hope here, and we wander over here, and then we look, they seem to have hope over there. I'll go over there, but what we find out is that the world has sold us a bad bill of goods. But then there's some hope because we encounter the resurrected Christ. God in the flesh who offers us grace and mercy and forgiveness and restoration and an insane level of hope found in him. This hope that looks different, though, than me doing my own thing, hoping it works out. Than me pursuing what my flesh wants to do, hoping that my hope gas tank kind of thing fills up and that I feel better. This hope that we're talking about is found in the resurrection life of following Jesus. And it permeates our very being, the core of who we are. Our thoughts and our attitudes, our insecurities, our addictions, our failures, our pride, our anger, our lust, our selfishness, our parenting and grandparenting, our sexuality, our employment, our finances, our physical, emotional, and relational health. Hope found in the resurrected Christ invades our very lives. And so in your life, you say, well, I need more peace, Jesus says, than live my resurrected life. Well, I need more joy than live my resurrected way. Then I need more hope than come follow me. Live out my ways and you'll find it. We can't do things on our own. We can't do things the way of the world or the way of me and expect hope to be resurrected. Instead, we submit our lives to him and allow Jesus to be the Lord of our lives. He becomes both the authority in our lives, but more than that, our Savior. And so the disciples that day found hope in the resurrection life when Jesus broke bread, and they realized, oh my goodness, we're in the presence of the resurrected Christ. Hope poured back in. So in just a minute, what we're going to do, just like the disciples, is we're going to sit at the table with Jesus, and we're going to enjoy communion.